once again, I want to thank everybody who has submitted fan art over the years, and I hope that this fan art that is popping up on the screen right now is just as appreciated by all of you as I appreciate the fact that it gets sent in at all. Like, I don't deserve any of the fan art that gets sent in, but it's still really cool that it happens. Anyway, today we got to talk about one of the most unique commander designs that we have gotten in recent years, and I am very, very excited to show off this deck because it uses such an interesting mechanic, and my girlfriend's been using a full power version of this deck recently, and it's a super interesting card. The commander we are going to be talking about today is Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, and we will be building a $15 deck with her, where the commander can account for $1 or less than the deck's cost, and then the rest of the deck can be $15 maximum, with a few cents as a give and take, depending on what the budget looks like. But Obeka, Splitter of Seconds says that she's got Menace, and anytime she deals combat damage to a player, you get that many additional upkeep steps after this phase. So we want to abuse upkeep triggers like crazy, and we want to get incremental advantage as a result of that. We also want to make sure our commander has the ability to get in there and do combat, so we're going to be building a deck that has the ability to do all of those things. But first, it'll be impossible for us to build a deck without having an adequate ramp package to make sure that that deck can function. And there's a very particular mechanic I'm going to be utilizing in this deck, so watch out for it. You've never seen me build a deck with this mechanic before, I guarantee it. Probably lying. Let's start out with Arcane Signet. Add a mana of any color in our commander's color identity. Ornithopter, add a mana of any color. Charcoal, Sky, and Fire Diamond can add any mana that our commander needs. Honored Heirloom can add a mana of any color and also gives us access to Graveyard Removal. Midnight Clock is a mana rock that also allows us at the beginning of an upkeep to put an hour counter on it, which we can mess with our commander. And then when the 12th hour counter is put on Midnight Clock, shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library and then draw 7 cards, exiling the clock. An easy way to refresh our hand. Wayfarer's Bauble can grab any of the lands our deck needs to survive. Replicating Ring can add a mana of any color, and at the beginning of our upkeep, put a night counter on the ring, and once it has 8 night counters, we create 8 copies of a replicated ring. I cannot create more replicating rings off of the replicated rings, but just the replicated ring alone is plenty to give us a very, very, very good burst of mana for later in the game. And then we have the card that gives away the entirety of what we're doing with our deck. This is Sarvex's Tome. It can tap for 1 colorless mana, and I don't want to say anything else it does. I have to, though. I have to. So, it's a 4-mana mana rock, adds a mana of colorless variety, and if we have the initiative, it adds 2 more mana, and when it enters the battlefield, you can take the initiative, or you take the initiative. Now, why do we have this in the deck? I need to quickly talk about the initiative and what it is, why we're using it, and if you've been here for a while, then you already know what the initiative is. You know that I enjoy abusing this particular mechanic, any dungeon mechanic at all, but if you don't know about it, the initiative basically puts you in this token called the Undercity. Search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. Like, that's already good, because that gives us the ability to get more land for higher cost spells later in the game. It prevents us from missing land drops. However, it also has a few other abilities, and every time we enter our upkeep and we have the initiative, we will go one step further. I hope you can see where we're going with this. We can then go into the Forge right here to put 2/1/1 counters on a creature, probably Obeka or Scry 2. Then we get to go into the next area where we either create a treasure token or make a player lose 5 life. In most decks, I tend to be on this side of the dungeon as often as possible because I like that treasure token. But in this deck, we're going to be going down the left side. First upkeep, we're going to put 2/1 counters on Obeka. Second upkeep, we're going to make a player lose 5 life. And then we get to draw a card from the archives during the third upkeep that the Undercity is available to us. And then during the fourth, we get to go to the Throne of the Dead 3, where we get to take one of our 17 creatures from the top cards of our deck, put it on the battlefield, and give it hexproof for a turn and 3/1/1 counters. This basically means that all of our upkeeps, we will be generating an ever-increasing value engine and making Obeka bigger and bigger and bigger, drawing more cards, throwing more creatures on the board, just in general creating a overwhelming tide of a board state. Then, Sarvok's Tome also has the ability to exile the top card of your library until you hit a non-land card and cast that card without paying its mana cost if you've completed a dungeon. Very, very interesting effect for our deck because we don't care what gets cast off the top of our library so long as it's not like one of our counter spells. So this is a good Hail Mary if you desperately need it. But we also need to make sure that our opponent's boards are kept clean for our commander to hit, so let's talk about the removal package of our deck. We have a 12-card removal package, beginning with Sinister Sabotage, a counterspell that lets us surveil 1, Disruption Protocol, a counterspell that can cost 1 less if we tap an artifact for its effect as well, which is easy to do because we have equipments and stuff. We don't care about tapping. Test of Talents can counter an instant or sorcery spell, the things we are most likely to be scared of. And as an added bonus, we can search a player's library, graveyard, and everything for every copy of that spell, and then exile them. All of them go away. This can be useful for preventing a flashback deck from getting its cards back, or if you happen to be playing like the Slimes Against Humanity deck, you can just turn the entire deck off. Also, if you are playing in a game that has a more problematic player who likes to, lie about the power level of their deck, just Test of Talents and go, hold on, everybody, I'm going to take 30 seconds to look through their entire deck and make sure that this person's on the up and up. It's a dick move to do, but if they're going to lie about what their deck does, it's okay to do dick moves back to them. Then we have Abrade, kill an artifact or 3 damage to a creature. Negate can counter a non-creature spell. Is it can counter a spell? Is it Charm can counter a spell unless its controller plays 2, and then we can go ahead and deal 2 damage to a creature if we choose, or we can draw 2, discard 2. Feed the Swarm blows up a creature or an enchantment. Then we have Weed Tunneler Poplar. At the beginning of our upkeep, target creature other than it gets -1/-1 until end of turn. We can use this to get rid of a lot of boards of tokens. We can use this to kill mana dorks, or we can use this to kill a big thing by stacking up upkeeps with it, because our commander creates a lot of upkeeps. Rakdos Charm can exile a player's graveyard, blow up an artifact, or deal 1 damage to its controller for every creature they have. So basically, the token player dies. Like, either the Reanimator player loses or the token player dies. Either way. Tithing Blade can make everybody sacrifice a creature, and then we can craft it with any creature to turn it into the Consuming Sepulcher. At the beginning of our upkeep, each opponent loses a life, and we gain a life. Super, super powerful effect with the Obeka, because if we've got 5 or 6 upkeeps available, that means every turn we're just like, hey, everybody, take 6. Card's amazing. Please run it. Then we have Bedevil. This card can blow up an artifact, creature, or planeswalker, and then Resculpt can exile an artifact or a creature, and then it gives somebody a useless token afterward. But of course, no deck will function unless we can get through the deck to draw cards, so let's go ahead and talk about what we are doing to supplement our draw package. Our initiative stuff gets through some of the deck, but we also need cards like Honden of the Seeing Winds. At the beginning of our upkeep, draw a card for every shrine we control. The deck only really has this shrine, and if you wanted to upgrade the deck, you could put a handful more shrines in if you so chose, but shrines are actually an interesting direction to take the deck if you choose to do that. But Honden says you draw a card for every shrine you control. So basically with Obeka, that means we're just going to draw 1 card for every upkeep we have. Then we have Netherese, the Puzzle Ward. At the beginning of your upkeep, roll a d4 and then scry X, where X is the result. Whenever you roll the highest roll of a dice, draw a card. This will let us sculpt the top of our deck as many times as we need during our upkeep, and we're almost always guaranteed to get at least 1 d4 max roll to draw a card off of this during an upkeep trigger. Then we have Indulgent Tormentor. At the beginning of our upkeep, we get to draw a card unless target opponent sacrifices a creature or pays 3 life. Just bully the most disadvantaged player at the table and use this to generate loss of advantage, or use this to knock down a peg the player that thinks that they're hot shit. Kumena's Awakening is basically Phyrexian Arena, but it happens to also be blue. If it has Ascension, then it is full-on just Phyrexian Arena. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card, but if you have the City's Blessing, only you draw a card. Never play this early. Play this always when you've got the ability to draw cards off of it, and the opponents will not gain anything from it, unless you specifically want to curry like political favor. Hostile Negotiations is just Fact or Fiction, but in black functionally. Both of them exile a certain number of cards on the top of your deck, then an opponent separates them into 2 piles, and you choose a pile to go into your hand. With Hostile Negotiations, they do a door 1, door 2 thing instead, where 1 face-up pile gets handed to you, and 1 face-down pile gets handed to you, and they get to pick which one you get to throw into the grave. It's a little less complicated than that, but basically 2 piles, door number 1, door number 2, your opponent picks which door you get. Ever-flowing well. When ETBs, mill 2 cards and then draw 2 cards. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 8 or more permanents in your grave, go ahead and transform it into the myriad pools. Whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by the pools, then one target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. So cast something like, say, the next card we're going to talk about, Thought Spy Network. We already talked about Honden. So you cast Honden using the mana from the myriad pools. Now another one of your permanents, just go ahead and say like one of your lands is now a copy of Honden. So now, during your upkeep that you're going to get after the battle phase because of our commander, now you get a bunch of draw triggers you otherwise wouldn't have had, which is a fantastic payoff for that. Thopter Spy Network, at the beginning of your upkeep, make a 1/1 colorless artifact creature token with flying, and then whenever one or more artifact creatures you control deal damage to a player, draw a card. This is primarily a draw engine for us, but eventually those Thopters can be a lot more menacing. Read the Bones, scry 2, draw 2, lose 2. Super simple. And then Ambition's Cost, a very quick 4 mana, draw 3, lose 3 life spell to round out our draw package with something that just hits a bit bigger. We also need to clear the way of our opponent's cards, so we have a couple board wipes to facilitate that. Necromantic Selection destroys all creatures, and we get a creature card that was put into a graveyard this way onto the battlefield under our control. Steal an opponent's creature or just keep Obeka out after you use this. Invasion of Fiora can either blow up all legendaries or all non-legendaries, and then it flips into Marchesa, Resolute Monarch. When she attacks, remove all counters from up to 1 target permanent. There are some niche situations where that's important, like against Super Friends decks. But the reason she's here is at the beginning of our upkeep, if we haven't been dealt damage since our last turn, easy to manage if we have Thopter Spy Network tokens blocking for us, then we get to draw a card and lose a life. So she is a Phyrexian Arena attached to the backside of a board wipe. What is not to love? Now, we got to talk about the most important part of the deck, the upkeep triggers. This is how we are going to be facilitating what the deck is doing primarily. So the first upkeep triggers we need to talk about, the boring ones for y'all, but the exciting ones for me, the initiative. Underdark Explorer gives us the initiative when it enters the battlefield, meaning we'll go 1 layer into the dungeon, and then we'll have the initiative, meaning that once our upkeeps begin, at the end of the battle phase, we will go and venture many more times. Vicious Battle Rager does the same thing, but if it becomes blocked by a creature, that player's controller loses 4 life. Erakoa Sneak, ETBs to take the initiative. Stirring Bard, ETBs to take the initiative, and it can also give a creature menace and haste, so we can give our commander haste if it's been killed a bunch. Passageway Seer has lifelink and ETB take the initiative. At the end step, if you have the initiative, put a 1/1 counter on it. Fey Wild Caretaker, ETB take the initiative at the beginning of your end step. If you have the initiative, make a 1/1 blue fairy token. Rilsa Kale Kingpin, ETB take the initiative, and if you attack, target attacking creature gains death touch until end of turn, and if you've completed a dungeon, give them 5/0 first strike and menace as well. This can make Obeka an absolute monster to swing with. Then we have Blood Boil Sorcerer. When it enters the battlefield, take the initiative, and we can also pay 2 to sacrifice an artifact or creature and goad a creature if necessary. Tomb of Horrors Adventurer takes the initiative when it ETBs, and also when we cast our second spell each turn, we can copy that spell, but copy it 3 times if we've taken the initiative. This card gets out of hand very, very quickly, and I suggest running it in any deck you can that has access to copy abilities. It is just a wonderful card. Loot Dispute, ETBs, and you take the initiative and create a treasure token. And if you attack the player who has the initiative, you also make a treasure token. Anytime we complete a dungeon, which is easy to do because of our Obeka triggers, we make a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying that can defend us. Then we have the Ravenloft Adventurer, ETB, take the initiative. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it and put a hit counter on it. When Ravenloft Adventurer attacks, if you've completed a dungeon, defending player loses 1 life for each card they own in exile with a hit counter on it. Basically, this is staxing out the reanimation players as a secondary ability, but as a primary ability, it is an initiative trigger for us. Then we have upkeep triggers that are just specifically upkeep triggers. These are cards that will benefit from Obeka's ability while not necessarily putting us into the dungeon. Let's begin with the equipments: Ring of Valkos, Zathrid, and Evos Isle. Valkos can give our commander haste, and at the beginning of our upkeep, if it is a red creature, we give it a 1/1 counter. We are going to have lots of upkeep, so super easy to manage. Ring of Zathrid, we can pay 2 to regenerate a creature, so it's protection for our commander, and if it's black, we get to put a 1/1 counter on it at every upkeep. Super easy to do. Then we have Ring of Evos Isle. It pay 2 mana to give the creature hexproof, another form of protection. And at the beginning of our upkeep, put a 1/1 counter on the creature. Then we have Skyland Despot. When it comes into the battlefield, we become the monarch, and at the beginning of our upkeep, if we are the monarch, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. So the turn we play this out, if Obeka hits for like 3, 4, 5 mana, that's just 5 dragons right there, all instantaneously. Then we have the Ruinous Powers. 4 mana at the beginning of our upkeep, choose an opponent at random, exile the top card of their library, and then when we play that card with any mana that we have available. Treasures we've gotten from the dungeon, treasures we've gotten from our other triggers, or just spare mana, all of it's viable. And whenever we cast a spell this way, its owner loses life equal to its mana value. So just... we take cards away from people, we can ruin their tutors, we can do all kinds of stuff, but also if we get one of their big haymakers, they just take lots of damage. Sucks to be them. Wildfire Devils at the as it ETBs or at the beginning of our upkeep, choose a player at random, then exile an instant sorcery from their graveyard, copy the card. You may choose new targets for the copy. They choose the card that gets copied, so be wary. Somebody could hand you just a dud, but it is just a fun card to play because of the way that it functions with our deck, because we get to do this multiple times in a single turn because of the upkeep triggers. Then we have As Foretold. At the beginning of our upkeep, put a time counter on As Foretold. Once during each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost of a spell, and then you get to play those cards for free. This is basically Omniscience, but in our deck. In our deck that is budget, is what I'm trying to say. But those aren't the only upkeep triggers we have. These are upkeep triggers that incrementally give us value or help us slowly win a game. What about ones that just win us the game outright? Well, we got 5 of those that's only job is winning us the game, starting with Ill-Gotten Inheritance. At the beginning of our upkeep, deal 1 damage to each opponent, and we gain 1 life. So that just stacks up a lot with our commander. Magmatic Force. At the beginning of each upkeep, deal 3 damage to any target. Each upkeep, mind, not just ours. So we get to go, hey, opponent who has 12 life, you may take 3 instances of this, but I'm not going to hit you for the 4th, because when I pass my turn, you'll take the 4th anyway. We can also kill creatures with this if we really need to, but primarily we're going to use this to turn players into Swiss cheese. Form of the Dragon does the same thing, but it deals 5 damage to target creature or player, and only at the beginning of our upkeep. At the end of each turn, our life total becomes 5. This, unfortunately, can kill us, so only play this if you are in a position where you are going to eliminate all the threats with it. Just hold it in your hand, otherwise it's okay to keep this for a long period of time until you can just have like 6 or 7 upkeeps and just burn everybody for dead. Bulwark. During your upkeep, deal 1 damage to target opponent for each card in your hand greater than the number of cards in their hand. Our dungeon ability, the initiative, does let us draw cards, and because our final initiative ability gets creatures out on the board, which furthers our initiative, it is very likely we will have bigger hands than most of the other people at the table, so Bulwark can easily allow us to say, hey, you spent a lot of cards last turn. You got 2 cards in hand, I have 7, take 5 every upkeep. That stacks up super quick. And then we have Court of Ire. When it ETBs, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, deal 2 damage to any target. If you're the monarch, deal 7 damage instead. So the turn this comes out, this is dealing 7 damage multiple times to any target. Blow up creatures or turn a player's life total, again, into Swiss cheese. Either way, the card is doing its job for us. But we're not done yet. We've got the ways the deck is winning. We've got the draw. We've got everything, but we need to keep our commander on the board long enough for it to hit, and we need to find ways to make sure our commander can always hit in. So let's go ahead and talk about how we're doing that. 2 protection cards that are only protection cards, Champion's Helm and Mirror Shield. Mirror Shield gives us Death Touch immunity functionally, and also gives us Hexproof. Champion's Helm gives us 2/2 and Hexproof if our commander is legendary, which it always will be. And then to facilitate getting in there, we have Cobbled Wings, Cloak of the Bat, and Clivehaven Kite Sail. Cloak of the Bat gives flying and haste. The Kite Sail gives flying and it auto-equips 1 time. And Cobbled Wings just gives flying, but it equips for 1, making it a very good return for us. But that's not everything we got to talk about. We also got to talk about the land base in this deck. And we are starting out with 21 basic lands, 7 of each. And then in the dual land section, we have 2 filter lands. We would put a 3rd one in if we had the budget for it, but we don't, unfortunately. Then we have Choked Estuary, Frostboil Snarl, and Foreboding Ruins as our reveal lands, and River of Tears as our one funky fun land, because it is they keep printing it in pre-con, so it keeps getting less and less expensive for us. Then in the fetching lands, we have Terramorphic Expanse, we have Escape Tunnel, we have Evolving Wilds. All of these can fetch any of the decks, any of the cards our deck needs as far as basic lands are concerned. Promising Vein and Shire Terrace can do it for 1 mana while being untapped lands otherwise, and Ash Barrens can basic land cycle into that mana. Then we have the Omni lands of the deck. Command Tower and Exotic Orchard can tap for any color depending on the situation, and Crypt of the Eternals can tap for any color if we filter it, or it can be an untapped colorless land. I like this in Grixis decks because untapped colorless is still good. And then we have Pit of Offerings, a secondary way to get rid of things in graveyards while also being a card that can get any mana of any variety because of how it's worded. We can just steal cards that equal up to Grixis mana, and then suddenly this is just a Grixis land card for us. And that is the entirety of our Obeka deck. We are going to be abusing triggers. We are going to be abusing all kinds of stuff to make sure that we are going into the dungeon a lot and winning the game that way. But we still got to talk about deck upgrades. What would I do differently if we had an unlimited budget? Well, aside from just chucking in a Soul Ring, the ramp base would get the Signet set. They are 20 cents each. Very, very easy to throw in most decks, but we have a very restrictive deck building condition. Upgrading the diamonds into these will do a lot of work in making sure that our deck is always on curve. Also, because we already have 1 shrine in here, it certainly doesn't hurt to go in a shrine direction, adding in the Go Shintais as well as adding in the Sanctums in here. Some of them have upkeep triggers, some of them have pre-combat triggers, so they're not as strong for us, but they do end up benefiting our upkeep abilities for things like, Haunted of Infinite Rage. If you wanted to go a shrine way, you definitely could do that if you so chose. Then there's also the big boy, Extravagant Replication. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of any non-land permanent you control. This card gets out of hand super fast with this deck. I'd highly recommend it, and its little brother Followed Footsteps, which only hits creatures and only the one you enchanted. Also, Phyrexian Arena, which I'm going to need to switch the printing of so that it's actually, this one right here instead. But the Phyrexian Arena, at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card and lose a life. It's one of the few decks I think actually could use the Phyrexian Arena. Also, if you wanted to go in a life gain direction, Ivory Tower is a cool include. It's not one that I had to cut because of budget. It's one I had to cut because of space, but I think it does a really, really interesting way of just drawing through your deck as well. Case of Shifting Visage as well. At the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil 1. If there are 15 more cards in your graveyard, then when you cast a non-legendary creature, copy that spell. Certainly an interesting way to use the upkeep mechanic, because as surveilling, we get to dig through our deck and always make sure we have good cards. And then that final ability will allow us to copy any of our initiative creatures on the board. I couldn't find space for this in mine, but if you find space for it in yours, then it is perfect. Also, Goblin Assault creates a fuck ton of goblins, so it is a perfectly reasonable card as well. A pet include I wanted to drop in as well was Blood Tyrant. Flying Trample. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player loses a life, put a 1/1 counter on it for each 1 life lost this way. I really wanted to include this, but I did not find the space for it, unfortunately. But with all that said, that is Obeka, a wonderfully interesting commander that allows us to make sure that we have lots and lots of upkeep triggers to abuse lots and lots of upkeep mechanics. My favorite upkeep mechanic being the initiative, so of course I went a dungeon route with this deck. But you can go any route you want with it. I think that there's a lot of just dumb things this deck can do if you allow it to. So, hey, pick whatever direction you want to go in and just run at it. The deck's going to be fun either way. As always, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate every one of you. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.